Hello everyone, welcome to the first video tutorial. In this video we are going to cover chapter 1 from the book. Now what this book does is it gives you step-by-step instructions through each type of problem in each chapter, each of the 8 chapters. And so what I'm going to do is simply follow what the book is doing so you can see what it looks like on an actual screen rather than just having the pictures out there. And I'm going to explain what I'm doing as I go. As you can see, we are in Microsoft Excel 2010 for Windows, and that's what the book teaches to. Many of you may be in Microsoft Excel 2013, which is extremely similar, but some of the functions may be in slightly different places. You'll probably be able to find them. If you don't, the first step would be to Google how to do something. So if I'm doing it one way, for example, if I'm doing autofill, which is up over here, and we'll do this in a second. If we do fill and you can't find fill on your version of Excel, simply Google it, and Microsoft has amazing help menus. You could also find stuff up there from just regular people who put in directions online on Google, and you could find those. Now, if you still don't, are not able to get done what you need to get done by Googling it, then contact me and I will find a version that matches the version you have and figure out the way to do it and walk you through that process. And I don't mind doing that. I enjoy it, so not a problem at all. Now, those of you that might be on Apple computers, if you're on a Mac, Excel will look fairly different in many ways. However, most of the functionality is still there. Excel does not come in its full 100% version for Mac, but we can get done everything we need to get done in this class. I should say you can get done everything you need to get done on this class on a Mac. You may have the same issue where you're going to have to go Google something to figure out how to do it. When I say right click, you're just going to hold your button down instead of right clicking. Little things like that which you're probably used to as a Mac user. But everything can be done. There will be certain situations where what the Mac can do is so different than the PC that I may direct you to do other things. And we'll talk about those when we get to them. But everyone should have no real problems navigating these videos and the book in terms of Excel competence. Okay, let's go ahead and start with Chapter 1. I'm on page 4 in your textbook, and I'm going to do pretty much exactly what the book says, with explaining while I do it. So under 1.4, it says under cell A3, I'm going to type the word year. Under cell B3, I'm going to go first year sales, $, which is shift 4, 000, close parentheses, and under A4, I'm going to type the number 1. Now, I'm assuming that many of you are going to have Excel competencies all over the board. For some of you, this may be your first exercise into Excel. Others may be experts. I realize that. I'm going to teach as basically as I can. And if you are an expert and these videos just aren't really necessary, I do encourage you to still watch them because I am going to explain concepts as I go. But I think that I do want to teach at the most basic level so we don't leave anyone behind. Okay, so now we're going to go to 1.41 using the fill series column commands. Now this is something that even experienced Excel users don't always do. What we're going to do is we need the numbers 1 through 8 in these columns here. And what many experienced Excel users will first do is, oh, let's drag it. Well, no, then it's just going to give us all 1s. That doesn't help us. Or you can go 1, enter 2, and then you highlight both of those, put the little X in the lower corner, push the cursor, for me it's left click, and drag this down till it gets to 8. That works as well. I'm going to highlight all these and delete them and then do it how it tells you here. Now the problem with that, well, let me go back here. 1, enter 2, is say, what if I'm in a, it doesn't apply to this book, but what if I'm in a situation where I need to have 4,000 numbers? Well, that gets a little old to come down here. I mean, it's not that big a deal, but there is an easier way. And so we're going to go ahead and show you that easier way. And come back up here, delete these, type 1. And what we're going to do is simply go over here to fill and put series. I'm going to go linear, rows, step value 1, stop value is 8, and actually we're going to be columns because we're going vertically, and I'm going to hit OK. And that's going to go 1 through 8. So there we go. And that's the easy way to do this. So moving on to section 1.4.2 is we're going to change the width of the column. So you can see first year sales overlaps here. And so what I'm going to do is simply put my cursor between the A and the B where I get those two arrows. I'm going to push down on the button and expand, and that's how you change the width of the column. Okay. Now we're going to center our information. Oh, they want us to type these other numbers in there, don't they? And so let's go ahead and type those in. So we got 10, 10, 12, 16, 22, 29, 39, and 47. By the way, for those of you that are not experienced Excel users, I highly recommend that you use a mouse when navigating Excel as opposed to a touchpad. It's just quicker. I know some of you are probably touchpad masters, but with the way that you have to do multiple things at the same time, a mouse tends to be a little easier. Just a little tip. So let's center our information, and Excel makes this very easy to center. And I'm on page 7 right now, so I'm just going to highlight everything. The book wants me to highlight everything, so I'm going to. Just push the button down and highlight that whole box, and then I'm going to go to this little tab right here and push left click, and everything gets centered in the cell. We can also center it up and down. Now I just centered it up and down. You can't tell the difference because the row heights are fairly small, but if I had taller cells, I could center it vertically as well. So now we're going to name a range of cells. Now this is also a shortcut that many experienced Excel users do not use, because if I wanted to calculate something with this group of numbers, I could simply highlight the group of numbers within and reference them. But there's actually an easier way. So we're going to do it. It's a good tip that the book gives us. And so we're going to highlight all of those, and we're going to right click and go to define name. And I'm going to move it over here a little bit, and it wants us to name it product, so we're going to do that. That's all we have to do, and click OK. So now we have a name for those cells, and you're going to see why that's important in just a couple minutes. So the next step over here, and to go to cell E6 as directed on page 9, and I'm going to type the letter N. Then I'm going to go down to E9 and type mean. And I'm going to go here and type standard dev, which is short for standard deviation. And then I'm going to go a couple lower and go SE, which is short for standard error. Now we're getting into some real stats. Now, some of you may be asking, especially experienced Excel users, why did the book have us put these values all the way over here, these labels all the way over here instead of down below, which is what most of us were used to doing, or why did they leave these spaces? The simple answer to the question is, I don't know. That wouldn't have been my instinct, but we're going to follow the book so that there's consistency between the video and the book. But I'll point out several times things that just, I wouldn't leave all this space here if it was me setting it up. But once again, we are going to follow the book. So the first thing we're going to do, N means we need to know how many values. That N is for number, short for number. So what's the total number? What's the total number of values? And so in order to calculate that, we're going to go, there's two ways to do it. I'll show you both. Equals, count, open parentheses, and I'm going to highlight this group of cells. Okay? and then I'm going to do a close parentheses. Now what that does is you can see it puts the word product in there because I've already labeled it. So let's say instead of doing that, I'm going to put count, and then I'm going to highlight this group because I haven't labeled it, and that's what it would look like, and the count would be 8. We already knew that because it's 1 through 8. So if you ever want to know how many items are in a list, that's how you do it. So I'm going to go back and do it the way the book tells us to do it, which is equals, count, open parentheses, type the word product, close parentheses, and there's your 8. Okay, because especially if, say, this group of numbers here, instead of only having 8 values, what if it had 7,000 values? Well, highlighting it gets to be a bit of a pain at that point, so labeling is helpful. So the mean. Now the mean is the average of a group of numbers. We all remember average from grade school or maybe junior high or high school, just to take an average. So the statistical term is mean, and we're just going to type equals average, open parentheses, product, close parentheses, and there's our average, 23.125. Now you may ask yourself, why doesn't Excel just use mean instead of average? I do not know the answer to that. I've always wondered that myself. If you know the answer, please email me because I'd love to tell students in future emails the reason for that. Next, standard deviation. Now, many of you have heard the term standard deviation before, but may not know exactly what it means. Now, some of the readings should have helped you along to know what it means. Basically, the easiest way to think of it is standard deviation explains the level of dispersion around the mean. So if we have a group of numbers, and say 8 numbers, and the mean, we'll use the same mean as 23.125, and the standard deviation were 20. Well, that would tell us that the numbers were really spread out. So you'd have some really low numbers and some really high numbers because that's a big standard deviation. The numbers would be really spread. Now if we had a standard deviation of 3, that would tell you that the standard deviation is small in comparison to the mean. So that means the numbers are all clumped together. They're all really close to 23. And that's helpful in knowing what a set of data looks like. Is a mean an accurate representation of what's going on? For example, if I am calculating test scores and the mean on the exam is 75%. I think, well, everybody kind of knew the material. That's a C. That's okay. I may not think much of it, but if I looked at the standard deviation, what if the standard deviation was 20? Well, that would mean that I had everybody mainly got A's or F's, and they just happened to average to a C, to a 75%. And that would tell me that students either knew it or they didn't, and that could be a problem, especially for all those that didn't know it. However, if I look and it's a mean of 75 and a standard deviation of 4, well, then I know all the students, or nearly all of them, were really closely lumped together. See the difference in what the standard deviation can tell you about the mean. So let's calculate standard deviation, and the reason we abbreviate the standard dev is so that you remember how to enter it. Now, as you see here, I have these options. I can go standard deviation .p, .s, and all these others. We're just going to do straight standard deviation. We're not going to get involved. P is for population, S is for sample. We're not going to get involved with that in this class, simply because I want to move on to other things and not spend time on that. So we're just going to do straight standard dev, product, there we go, 14.02, which is a fairly large standard deviation for a mean of 23. And finally, standard error. Now, standard error refers to the accuracy of the mean with referencing the population. So if you're using standard error, that means these are sample numbers of a larger population. And so you may take, instead of, for example, if I have 100, say 200 students in a class, and I were to do an analysis of their grades, I may take a sample of 10 or 20 of them, and rather than doing the whole thing. And this is especially you do this a lot with polling data, or you want to extrapolate what the entire state of California or the United States of America thinks about something. You're going to take a small sample and then rather than polling every single person in the country. And so doing that, what you're going to need to do is, what the standard error, I should say, what the standard error does is tells you when you get a mean for your sample, how accurate that mean is for the sample with referencing the entire population. So how accurate is that sample in representing the entire population? So the standard error, we don't have a simple calculation for it, an Excel function, so we're just going to go equals, just following the book, the bottom of page 10 here, F12. I'm going to click on F12 rather than type it. This is always a safer thing to do because there's less chance of making a typing mistake. Divided by square root, SQRT. And we're going to go the square root. Now I'm going to differ from the book here. The book uses the number 8, and instead I'm going to click on that cell reference because that's what it's for. You're supposed to be square root of n, and I am going to reference that rather than type 8. And that is one area where I will disagree with the book, because you always want to reference, because that way if I had a longer list of numbers over here, that means I don't have to go digging into formulas and change a number manually. It will automatically adjust for me. And so your standard error is 4.958533. So now the book wants us to do some formatting, so we'll go ahead and do that. So it wants us to take these to 2 decimal places. Just highlight that whole group, and that's what these little guys here are for. So I click that button and it takes me to 2 decimal places. And moving right along to page 13 on how to save this. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'm going to click Save As. And I will go ahead and just save it to my C drive. I'm going to go to Computer and just click on the C drive, and I'm just going to label it. Well, they ask us to call it Product 3. That's confusing to me. That doesn't tell me what this is. I'm going to go Stats Class, and then I will call it Chapter 1. That tells me what it is. Save. No. See if it's not going to let me save it where I want to, so I'll just let it have him save it where it seems to want to save it. Okay. Very good. Well, it's making me... Sorry for the delay on this. It seems to want me to do something different than I wanted it to, and I don't want to waste time on that. Next is printing a spreadsheet. We're not going to print in this class. You're going to submit these documents digitally. Printing Excel sheets is pretty rare that you need to do that. As paper becomes less and less necessary, even in meetings now, people have their tablet computers, and so it's just really not that big a deal. I'm not even going to get into it since you all have your own printers and own settings, so we won't do any printing in this class, and everything that has to do with printing in the book you can ignore. And finally, in section 1.7, it talks about putting things in currency format. And that's a good, I'm just going to convert these 3 things to currency, and I'll do it real quick and easy here. And to do that, for one, I can just click on that little guy right there. Or, oops, I'm going to send that back. You can change things right here. There's lots of ways to do this. I'm just kind of showing you them. Or I can right click, and it gives me, I can go to Format Cells, and this is where you get all your good options here. And right now it's number with 2 decimal places. I could change it to 3, change it to 4, and then go back to 2. And I'm just going to click on currency, symbol. It's going to put the symbol there in 2 decimal places. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And that, when you do that, it puts the $sign right next to your number, which I always think that looks a little better. Some people like it here, and you can do that as well, and just click on that. Now if you want this to look like the other, you can change the settings. We won't get into any of that. But the book thought it important that you know how to put things in currency format, so we'll go ahead and do that. All right. I think we pretty much covered it. There is 1.8 with the 3. You could change it to 3 decimal places. So if I wanted to do that, I would just go to number and then click that button, and that goes to 3. So there you go. All right, that does it for chapter 1. So we'll go ahead and stop there and pick up with chapter 2.